Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Trends. I'm Dawn, Content and Communications Lead of Leong Global Investors. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Joining us on this episode is Ong Ai Ling, our Head of Artificial Intelligence of Investments here at Leong Global Investors. Ling has over 16 years of investment experience and is currently also the portfolio manager of the Leong Global Disruptive Innovation Fund. Welcome again, Ling. I am so glad to have you back.
Thank you, Dawn. I'm very excited to be back too.
In the last episode, we took a deep dive into the concepts of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. We also discussed man versus machine and who will win. To that end, you brought up our hybrid approach towards investing. So can you remind the audience again, what is it all about?
Yep. So just as a quick recap, my basic premise is that investing is both an art and a science, so it utilizes both your left and your right brain. The scientific portion is when we evaluate the realms of quantifiable data that's available on each stock, or, for example, the macro data points that we can measure and observe. Whilst the artistic part is the ability of a human to imagine what can happen in the future. So whilst the machine can be very good at analyzing existing data and formulating short-term predictions by uncovering patterns from historical data, at least for now, with today's technology, I'm still not completely convinced that a machine can come up with something truly new or truly innovative, something that it hasn't completely seen before. So, for example, I know you mentioned in some of your LGI posts that machines claim to create artwork. And they look very creative, very abstract. Yes. But actually, if you understand the science behind it or the math behind it, it's actually based on the principle of recognizing pattern in existing artwork. So it could, if you feed it enough Monet, enough Van Gogh, enough what's his name, Jackson, it'll be able to recognize what makes this thing artistic, recognize the pattern, and come up with that. So actually now we've reached a stage where we have what you call deepfakes. You see those CGI graphics where someone who's not saying something is saying something. Yeah. But the idea is actually you're just combining two different features and putting it together in the same screen. So a simple example you can think of is if you feed the machine a red bus and you give it a green car. Okay. It's then able to imagine a red car or a green bus. Okay. It's mixing and matching. But can it imagine something completely different? So can it imagine, for example, a new way of transport, say, assuming it hasn't watched Star Trek before, can it imagine a teleportation device? I don't think at this stage it can really imagine something it's completely never seen before.
Right, so you feed it the data and it recognizes the patterns and it spits out the output based on what the humans have actually input into the machine.
Exactly, so it's a fusion. It can fuse things, but it can't come out with something completely original.
Okay, it's very interesting.
Well, having said that, I'd say that most humans, if they've not watched Star Trek, might not be able to imagine teleportation devices either. I mean, I'm not that creative.
Yeah, that's true. That's very, very true.
So in an investing context, what this means for us is that whilst humans are very good at coming up with new business ideas, entrepreneurs, right? And investors like ourselves are very good at evaluating the long-term viability of such business ideas. At this stage in our technology, I wouldn't yet trust a machine to answer my basic investment questions, which is, does this company's business model make sense in the very long run? Is it going to be profitable, or will it turn profitable in the long term, or in the medium to long term? Can it survive the next 10 or 20 years? So for us here at AIOI, to make the most of the machine's strengths and capabilities, we should be leveraging the almost unlimited capacity of data storage and its strong capacity of data processing in this age of modern computing. In other words, my ethos is very much let the machines do what they're good at, crunch the data, process the data, even interpret in simple sense, like using NLP, for example, the vast amount of data which we get thrown at.
Too much.
Which gets thrown at us every day, right? But then this frees up our human brain powers to do the bits that the machines can't do, which is your creativity and imagination.
Yes, indeed.
So what we do here is we harness the machine learning to process and interpret raw data that's available in every single company. And we do that in a way that mimics as far as possible how a human would think logically and analyze that data. But we don't forget, we don't leave the creative part to the machine,
to
right?
You guys, to you
exactly.
guys. Yeah.
And that's achievable today only because we have had so much advances in AI. And we use that to inform our short-term trading views. So remember the analogy of the agricultural automation, right? That's in the same way that, in agricultural automation period, it freed up the farmer's time from plowing the land, tilling the land, watering the crops. So you don't have to focus on the minutiae or the micro details of the land. You are freed and you can actually focus on the bigger picture of being an estate manager, not a laborer. So in that same way, our hybrid approach now frees up the fund manager's brain power and time, allowing us to focus on the broader, longer-term issues such as the viability of a company or how we can improve our process, how can we gain an investment edge by finding new alpha signals or mining information from new data sets or looking at old data and big data. So I truly believe that it's very important for us to harness the machine learning power because we are at the cusp of a new data-driven revolution, an age of artificial intelligence.
So I hear you and I'm completely sold. So basically, we are harnessing the best of both worlds, using AI and ML to enhance our investment process. And like what you said, let machines do what they're good at, the crunching, the processing data, and fund managers like yourselves to think, creatively and to make, bigger decisions. However, there's always this talk that machines may one day kind of take over the world, take over humans.
Skynet.
Yes, there's a lot of futuristic shows like Black Mirrors. They suggest things like that, right? So the question is, will machines always do the right thing for us? Because you recently wrote on your LinkedIn post of the importance of human oversight over AI algorithms.
That's
so
true.
Maybe you can share with us more about that.
So are machines always benign? Machines are neither good nor evil. They actually just do what humans program them to do, right? So my LinkedIn post actually was talking a little bit about the TikTok blackout challenge, and unfortunately recently we had a few very young kids copying the TikTok blackout challenge, which resulted in irreversible tragedies. According to the news report, the AI algorithm had actually been pushing such unsuitable video content at the young children. And to me, at least, from my understanding, tragedies like that really highlight the importance of having to retain quite a bit or some level of human oversight on AI algorithms. So from my understanding of how the AI algorithms work at these social media companies, they have a certain KPI, or in scientific term, what we call an objective function. And in this case, it's likely going to be, the objective function is likely going to be maximizing video views. So they will push content based on your demographic, what they think you're interested in, and what, and unfortunately, they may not consider whether it's suitable. So such content, for example, would not have been pushed at adults. They would have been pushed at the younger kids because that's the kind of stuff that these kids find interesting, funny. So an adult, for example, an adult viewer would unlikely be shown such content as they are not profiled to be the correct demographic to view or even click through. So the objective function is how many clicks or how many views they have, right? So in some ways, if you think about it, this is quite similar to setting KPIs for humans. So if your server has his or her bonus or wages tied to the amount of food or the value of the food that they're selling to you, you can be sure that they will try and upsell you more food without regard for your appetite or whether you need that food or not. So you would get "Sir, would you like to upsize your Coke and fries or make it a happy meal?"
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
Yes, it's in human nature to try and push the highest commission or revenue generating product. So there's a field of science called game theory. I don't know if you've heard of that before. And within game theory, there's a specific problem called the principal agent problem. This is a classic case of principal-agent problems and similar kind of situations happen with, in a non-machine learning human world as well. And in the human world, we deal with such agent problems through three main means. One is regulation, one is education, and the third is oversight. So in terms of regulation, I suspect we don't have much regulation in the machine learning world yet, but eventually it will have to be put in place. So say, for example, autonomous driving, right? One of the reasons why autonomous driving is being held back is less so the actual technology, but this moral ethic issue of when you see a bus with kids, a bus load full of kids and you see something, a curb, do you swerve it to avoid the one human, or do you continue going straight because it will otherwise injure the bus load full of kids? So that has to be that has to require some sort of regulation before we can get to the point of autonomous driving. And then in terms of education, well, in the human world, all humans have basic code of ethics and morality that we've been brought up with. Now, machines don't have quite the equivalent of code of ethics or morality. How we do it is the computer programmer will have to tweak the codes so that you set certain constraints. So, for example, when I look at the number of views or clicks, I don't just aim to optimize that and solely that as my objective function. I actually have to balance it against other goals, objective function versus, goals of not sending the same thing to someone, or perhaps making sure that it's the correct demographic, the right suitability, right? So in that sense, regulations are PG-16 or PG-12, whatever it is, and education will be the coder changing the code. And then finally, you have this issue of, so in that sense, I think maybe one day we will see a new field, not just artificial intelligence, but actually you could see artificial ethics or artificial morality.
Okay.
So that brings us to the last point, which is oversight. And I think that oversight is probably the reason why you and I might still have jobs in the future. We'll be in charge of, doing one of these three things.
Oh, that's very good to know that, our jobs will be saved. Super interesting that you mentioned, towards the end about this artificial ethics or morality. Yes. I mean, it totally can be a whole new episode on itself, whether artificial systems, the word artificial, right? Can it actually be furnished with moralities? Because morality is what makes humans, right, to kind of act as moral agents. So we'll keep that thought. That thought.
It will be a very big field to talk about, right? Yeah. Intelligence versus, how can we emulate morality.
There's like the example you said about machines upselling like fries and Coke, right? So it's pretty much the same. So, so if AI can result in the wrong outcome, as you said, without, the correct human supervision, so how can we ensure that AI gets it right in the investing context?
Oh yes, indeed. And that's the problem that we tackle, we grapple with every single day when we're coding up our stuff. Remember I shared with you the analogy of how machine learning works?
Yes.
The one baby. About the baby, yes. So if you, because machine learning works on the basis of having a goal or a KPI or what in data science we call an objective function, right? So if you give the baby no explicit instructions, but every time it exhibits good behavior by not crying, I'll give it a sweet, right? So after a while, it will learn that every time it does something good, it gets a reward, right? Of course, the problem is if every time it stops crying when it's crying, you give it a sweet, then after a while it might actually learn the wrong thing. Correct. That every time I cry, I get a sweet, which is what happened in the situation we talked about earlier. So whilst machine learning is based not so much on giving specific instructions, but on setting the machine a goal, in an investing context, we have to be careful how we define the goal or the objective function. Sure, we can say, give me the most profits, maximize profits. but then we neglect, just like the algorithm that aims to maximize the number of views. We could neglect the other parts of it. So we have to consider how much risk are we willing to take? Will we be willing to lose all our capital, even if it's only a 1% chance, right? And on top of the objective function, as a fund manager, we also have to be careful about what inputs we feed the machine. Remember I said red car, green car? The machine learns only from the inputs that it is shown, right? So this is where the area of human knowledge, this is the area of where domain knowledge and human expertise comes into play, because exactly which set of data do we want the machine to be learning from? So in coding, we have this phrase, garbage in, garbage out. Quite a popular phrase. If I give it irrelevant inputs, then the machine will just make up spurious links between the inputs and come up with spurious logic, just like the baby with the sweet. It'll think, every time I cry, I get a sweet. Rather than every time I exhibit good behavior, I get a sweet. So, finally for us, in a holistic sense, our design is very important for the overall model, from the goal that we set it to the inputs that we feed it, the algorithm, the specific choice of algorithm that we use, the specific choice of the hyperparameters that we use, and the sequence that we use them in the logic, because we use more than one algorithm, we use several different algorithms. So, when we set up AIOI in an investing context, what we're trying to do is really to try and approximate and codify my brain, or a good fund manager's brain, right? Any good fund manager's brain. We try and codify how that fund manager thinks in terms of his or her logic, and result in the similar output to what he or she would be doing.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, the process is just so difficult and so technical, right? So, share with the audience, please, right, about this new AIOI team that you have been setting up here at Lion Global Investors. Obviously, you spearheaded, this AIOI team in Lion, and your motivation of setting up, this AIOI team within the Singapore fund management industry.
Yeah. So one of the key motivators when I started AIOI was to bring more sophisticated investment techniques to the local investment landscape. Remember, I told you, I'd seen a lot of similar things in the hedge fund world. So my vision was to democratize that democratize investing as a whole by making such investment techniques available to the average investor in Singapore. Quantitative investing, traditional quantitative investing, has been employed mostly by hedge funds, then traditional asset managers in Singapore. And hedge funds tend to have very high minimum threshold for investing, and they also require you to have pretty high risk-taking profile. So you usually cannot invest in hedge funds unless you're an accredited investor or a high net worth individual.
With a lot of risk appetite.
Yes. And on top of that, I didn't want to just merely replicate, like for like, wholesale, all the techniques that the traditional quantitative techniques that hedge funds use. I actually wanted to leapfrog to the space and use newer, more sophisticated tools, borrowing ideas from the AI machine learning space. And this is really at the cutting edge, because I think in our industry, even in the US, even in Europe, they are just starting to borrow such techniques and employ it. So in other words, to democratize access to the whole quantitative field, that and also democratize access to these tools, these machine learning tools that are revolutionizing the financial industry. And we don't just want to copy, we want to go over and beyond. And finally, one of the other motivations is to try and help develop the future of the Singapore asset management industry and to build up the talent pool that we have here in Singapore. So as we approach National Day, I'm feeling extremely patriotic.
Okay.
I'm very proud of Singapore, and I really believe that we've come a very long way since independence. 57 years from that Longkang, journey that we, Longkang state that my parents grew up in, right? Today, Singapore, we've achieved we've already achieved the buzzing financial hub, and I think we're coming along in our journey of building up the scientific talent to achieve an AI and data analytics hub here in Singapore. And, many thanks to all the people who've been participating and growing it. And I really think that, I grew up, I grew up in Singapore. I studied in some of the best educational institutions here in Singapore. And I really believe that we have a very good educational system. So we have the raw materials. We have great people. We have a good education system. We have the raw materials to really develop the brains and the power for having homegrown talent.
Yes.
So, for example, do you know Professor Andrew Ng?
Actually, I don't. Unfortunately, I don't.
You've heard of Coursera?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So he's the co-founder of Coursera.
I see.
And the reason why I brought him up is because he's one of the leading world-leading authoritative figure on machine learning.
Wow.
He actually graduated from Stanford, and I think he's done a lot of work at Stanford and MIT on machine learning.
I see.
Did you know that he actually studied at RI?
Wow.
And graduated from RI. Yes.
Homegrown talent.
Yeah. Graduated from RI in 1992. So, incidentally, he's one of my university classmates' brother. So we respect him. We're in awe of him.
Yes. So,
I really hope that at least in my lifetime, Singapore will be able to develop such talent and we will become recognized as an AI hub. So, I'm very proud and very appreciative of being Singaporean, and I hope to contribute to my own country, our own country, in my own little way.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, it's a noble aspiration. I think what you do, it's great, right? AIOI, as you said, Singapore, homegrown talent. We're trying to grow our talent pool. And I think at Leong Global Investors, we've always wanted to democratize access of all these sophisticated investment techniques so that they can be available and beneficial, I guess, to the every man on the street. Yes. So thank you so much. It's been super interesting just talking to you and learning more about AI and ML and how we're using it at Leong Global Investors. So thank you so much, Ling. Your insights are always very enlightening and your examples are always on point.
Thanks, Dawn. It's great and it's a pleasure speaking with you too.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. You have been listening to Let's Talk Trends with me, Dawn Leong. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe to our show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Catch you guys next time.